How to remember everything. The method that changes your mind. Segment 1. The moment you realize your memory can change. There comes a moment in life when you look at yourself and whisper, "Why can't I remember anything?" You forget names, you forget tasks, you forget where you kept something, and worst of all, you forget the things that matter to you. You feel embarrassed, you feel slow, you feel behind, you feel like something is wrong with your brain. You watch other people remember effortlessly dates, details, conversations, information, and you think, why can't I do that? You start believing memory is a gift some people are born with and you're not. You tell yourself a story. I'm just forgetful. That's who I am. But here is the truth that almost no one tells you. Your memory is not broken, it is untrained. Your brain is not weak, it is unused. Your mind is not failing you, it is waiting for the right method, the right system, the right approach. What you call forgetfulness is actually a result of how your brain is wired, and the good news is that wiring can change. Not slowly, not painfully, but quickly if you understand how memory works. The next few sentences may shock you, but you must hear them clearly. You can dramatically improve your memory. You can remember names, dates, information, vocabulary, anything. You can change the way your brain stores and retrieves information. You can train your mind to remember more than you ever imagined. And this is not theory. This is science. You are about to learn the method that can change your memory, your confidence, and the way your mind works forever. But before we go into techniques and tools, you need to understand one thing. Your brain is not a storage device. Your brain is an experience machine. It remembers what it feels, not what it receives. This one insight will shift everything. The story of how I discovered this begins on a day when I hit my lowest point. I had forgotten something important, something I shouldn't have forgotten, and I stared at the wall thinking, maybe I'm just not smart enough. But that moment became the turning point of my life. Because instead of accepting weakness, I became obsessed with understanding memory itself. I dove into neuroscience, psychology, learning theory, and real human stories of people who transformed their minds. And what I discovered changed me forever. Memory isn't about intelligence. Memory isn't about age. Memory isn't about talent. Memory is about method. Let me take you into the science behind this, because once you understand it, your entire perspective will shift. Your brain remembers in stories, emotions, connections, and meaning. It doesn't remember in plain text. It doesn't remember isolated information. When something enters your mind without emotion, without meaning, without connection, the brain drops it. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is protecting you from overload. You receive thousands of pieces of information every hour. Your brain filters almost all of it out. It only keeps what feels important, what feels emotional, what feels meaningful. This means forgetfulness isn't failure. Forgetfulness is the brain saying, this information doesn't feel relevant. So if you want to remember everything, you must learn the skill of making information meaningful, not emotional drama, not huge excitement, just enough relevance that your brain decides this matters. When I learned this, I looked back at the memories I held on to, moments from childhood, moments of fear, moments of joy, moments of embarrassment, moments of love. Every single one carried emotion, not information, emotion. And suddenly everything clicked. Memory is not a storage process. Memory is an emotional tagging system. This realization changed everything for me. Because if the brain can tag information emotionally, that means we can deliberately tag information so it sticks. And this is how memory masters, students, polyglots, doctors, lawyers, and anyone who remembers huge amounts of data actually do it. They are not smarter, they are not faster, their brains are not superior, they simply use the brain the way it was designed. Let me take you deeper into this journey. When you learn something new, an English word, a fact, a name, an idea, your brain receives it as a neutral signal. Neutral signals fade. This is why most people forget what they learn within minutes. But when you attach meaning, connection, imagination, or emotion to that signal, the brain rewrites the pathway. It becomes stronger, thicker, more permanent. I tested this theory the very next day after my breakdown. I decided to learn 10 random English words, not by memorizing them, but by connecting them to something meaningful. Instead of repeating them like a robot, I told a story. I added emotion. I added movement. I added creativity. And for the first time in years, I remembered everything. That moment felt like unlocking a hidden superpower. Because it wasn't just about words, it was about understanding that my memory was alive, my memory was flexible, my memory was waiting for the right method. In the days that followed, I used the same technique on names, lectures, tasks, ideas, plans, and everything started sticking. The more I practiced, the stronger my memory became. Not slowly, not painfully, but noticeably, dramatically, shockingly. I realized that the brain is not a problem. The brain is a tool, and tools work when used correctly. But the most powerful part of this transformation was not the memory improvement itself, it was the change in my identity. I no longer said, I have a bad memory. I started saying, my brain can learn anything. And when you change the story you tell yourself, your brain begins changing the story it tells you. In this 7-part journey, you will learn the actual method that rewires your memory. You will understand the science, the psychology, and the simple daily practices that make remembering easy, natural, and automatic. You will learn how students master huge amounts of information, how language learners retain new vocabulary, how speakers memorize speeches, how professionals remember details, and how ordinary people become extraordinary learners. But before we move forward, I want you to carry this truth with you. Your brain is capable of remembering more than you ever believed. Your memory is not fixed. Your potential is not limited. Your mind can grow at any age, and your ability to remember is a skill, not a gift. This is the beginning of a new relationship with your mind. This is the beginning of a new identity. This is the beginning of your transformation. Welcome to the journey of remembering everything. Segment 2. Why we forget. The hidden truth about your brain's memory system. If you want to remember everything, you must first understand why you forget. Most people think forgetting is a sign of weakness or low intelligence. They think it means something is wrong with them. They think their brain works differently from others. But the truth is far more interesting, far more hopeful, and far more empowering. Forgetting is not a failure. Forgetting is a function. Forgetting is a design. Your brain is not built to store everything. It is built to protect you from storing too much. If your mind remembered every random detail you encounter in a day, the color of every car passing by, every noise you heard, every object in your room, you would drown in information. You would collapse under the weight of endless details. So the brain does something incredibly intelligent. It forgets what doesn't matter. The moment you understand this, a huge weight falls off your shoulders. You're not forgetful because your brain is broken. You're forgetful because your brain is efficient. But efficiency becomes a problem when the brain filters out the things you want to remember. If you don't know how to signal importance, the brain simply discards the information. So, the first secret to remembering everything is learning how to communicate with your brain. You must learn to say, "This matters, keep it." That is what memory methods are about. Not tricks, not shortcuts, but communication. Memory improves when the brain understands meaning. Let's explore how this works on a deeper level. When new information enters the brain, it passes through a series of gates. The first gate asks a simple question: is this important? If the answer is no, the information is dropped almost immediately. This is why you forget the name of someone you just met at a party, not because your memory is weak, but because your brain hasn't yet understood why this person matters. The second gate asks, is this emotional? Emotion is the most powerful glue for memory. Joy, fear, surprise, embarrassment. These emotions tell your brain, this moment affects you. That is why you remember emotional scenes from childhood, but forget what you had for lunch 2 days ago. The third gate asks, is this connected to something I already know? The brain stores information in networks, not in separate boxes. When something is linked to an existing memory, it becomes easier to recall later. This is why metaphors, stories, and examples make learning easier. They connect the new with the familiar. And the final gate asks, will this be useful later? The brain loves survival. Anything it believes will help you in the future becomes a priority. But if your brain doesn't realize the usefulness of something, like a vocabulary word or a fact you studied for school, it will let it fade unless you give it a reason to stay. These gates determine what you remember and what you forget. And the best part is this: you can influence every single gate. You can train your brain to label information as important, emotional, connected, and useful. Once you learn how to do this, your memory becomes unstoppable. But let me take you deeper into the science. Memory is divided into two main types: short-term and long-term. Most people mistakenly believe they have a weak long-term memory. The truth is the opposite. Long-term memory is powerful. It holds experiences, emotions, languages, skills, faces, stories, sometimes for decades. What people struggle with is short-term memory. That small window where new information enters but quickly fades if not reinforced. Short-term memory is like a doorway. Nothing stays there for long. If you want information to pass through the doorway into long-term memory, you must strengthen it during its brief moment in short-term storage. That is where techniques like visualization, repetition, connection, and storytelling come in. They push the information through the door before it closes. Think of memory like a garden. Short-term memory is the surface where seeds land. Long-term memory is the deep soil where roots grow. If you want a seed to take root, you must press it into the soil with intention. Otherwise, it blows away with the wind. This understanding changed everything for me. Once I realized my brain wasn't resisting learning, it was following its natural design. I stopped fighting myself. I stopped getting frustrated. I stopped blaming my intelligence. I started learning how to work with my brain instead of against it. The first step was noticing how quickly information disappears if not reinforced. A new word learned once will vanish within hours. A fact heard once will dissolve by tomorrow. But the moment you revisit it through a story, a visual image, an emotion, or a meaningful connection, it begins to stay. With each layer of reinforcement, the memory deepens. The second step was understanding that the brain loves patterns. Anything structured, organized, or rhythmic becomes easier to remember. That is why we remember songs, poems, and phrases more easily than raw data. When you attach rhythm or structure to information, the brain treats it like a pattern. It becomes easier to store and retrieve. The third step was learning that memory is physical. When you remember something, your brain actually changes structure. Neurons grow new connections. Pathways strengthen. Signals travel faster. Memory is not a mental idea. Memory is a physical change. Every time you practice remembering something, you change the architecture of your brain. This realization feels almost magical. It means you are not stuck with the memory you were born with. You can grow it, you can train it, you can expand it. Just like a muscle becomes stronger with exercise, your memory becomes sharper with the right method. But here is the most important idea in this entire segment. Your memory becomes powerful when you stop trying to memorize and start trying to understand. Information you understand lasts longer than information you memorize. Understanding creates meaning. Meaning creates emotional connection. Emotional connection creates retention. This is why students who try to remember everything fail, while students who understand concepts succeed. This is why English learners who learn vocabulary in isolation forget quickly, but those who learn through stories, sentences, and emotional context remember easily. I spent years trying to memorize, and I failed again and again. But the moment I shifted from memorizing to understanding, everything changed. My memory didn't just improve, it transformed. And now, in this series, you will learn exactly how to do that. You will learn the method that turns ordinary information into unforgettable memory. You will learn how to attach meaning, how to create emotional tags, how to visualize information, how to build associations, how to use repetition intelligently, and how to organize facts so your brain never drops them again. This journey is not about forcing your brain to remember, it is about teaching your brain to listen. And once your brain starts listening, remembering becomes natural, effortless, automatic. In the next segment, you will learn the first pillar of remembering everything, the method that activates your brain's natural memory pathways and changes the way you store information forever. Segment 3. The first pillar of a powerful memory, turning information into images that stick. There comes a moment in every learner's journey when they finally understand why some people can remember everything so easily. It has nothing to do with being gifted or having a strong brain. It has everything to do with how they store information. The human brain is not built to remember words. It is built to remember pictures. When you learn to convert information into images, your memory stops resisting and starts cooperating. This is the first pillar of remembering everything. To understand this, you must first look at the way your brain evolved. Long before the invention of language, humans remembered the world visually. We remembered the shape of rivers, the color of berries, the path of animals, the pattern of the stars. The brain stored thousands of images as survival tools. Even today, thousands of years later, your brain still prefers images over text. This is why you can recognize a face instantly, but struggle to remember the name attached to it. This is why you remember scenes from childhood more clearly than information you studied last week. Visual memory is ancient, powerful, and deeply wired into your mind. When I discovered this, it changed everything. I realized that memory champions, polyglots, researchers, and high level students were not using their verbal memory. They were using their visual memory. They were converting the invisible into the visible. And once I applied this idea to my own learning, my memory began transforming rapidly. But let me tell you how I discovered the power of images in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, while reading a chapter for a course, I found myself forgetting every single sentence I had just read. I tried repeating the words, I tried focusing harder, I tried underlining and highlighting. Nothing worked. I felt frustrated, slow, and mentally exhausted. Then, out of desperation, I closed the book and imagined the concept as a picture, a simple, colorful image that represented the idea. Suddenly, I could recall everything, not just the main points, everything. It felt like magic, but it wasn't magic. It was the brain doing what it does best, remembering pictures. This moment taught me something powerful. If you want to remember anything, words, ideas, names, facts, you must transform them into images. Once the information becomes visual, it becomes unforgettable. Let's explore how this works at the brain level. When you hear a new piece of information, it enters your short-term memory as a fragile signal. If it remains verbal, it fades quickly. But the moment you turn it into a mental picture, it activates visual regions of the brain. The connection becomes stronger. The signal becomes richer. The memory becomes stickier. What was once fragile becomes stable. Think of a name like Michael. If you simply repeat the name, your brain has no anchor. But if you imagine Michael holding a microphone because the words sound similar, suddenly the name becomes visual. Now your brain has something to hold on to, and the next time you see him, the mental microphone appears instantly, reminding you of his name. The same is true for vocabulary. If you're learning the word gravity, your brain will forget it unless you link it to an image. Maybe someone falling or an apple dropping, like the famous Newton story. The moment you attach an image, the memory becomes grounded. But the power of visualization goes much deeper than memorizing simple words. You can use it to remember complex information, ideas, processes, stories, lectures, presentations, and even entire books. I learned this while studying a difficult subject that required me to remember multiple steps. Instead of forcing myself to memorize the sequence, I visualized each step as a scene. Suddenly, the entire process became easy. It felt like watching a movie rather than memorizing a list. The brain adores scenes. The brain adores stories. The brain adores movement. When you give it that, your memory becomes unstoppable. Let me give you a deeper look into the psychological mechanism behind this. Your mind operates like a theater. When you imagine something vividly, multiple brain areas activate simultaneously: the visual cortex, the emotional centers, the attention system, and the memory pathways. This creates a multi-layered memory. The more layers a memory has, the stronger it becomes. Words give you one layer. Images give you five. That's why visualization is so powerful. You don't need artistic imagination. You don't need perfect visuals. You simply need a picture, any picture that connects to the idea. The stranger or more unique the image, the easier it is to remember. Your brain remembers the unusual, the unexpected, the surprising. A boring image fades. A vivid one stays forever. I realized this when I tested myself one morning. I took 10 random facts and turned each of them into a picture. Then I waited for 2 hours without reviewing anything. When I tried to recall the facts, every single one returned instantly. Not because my memory had improved overnight, but because I used the brain the way it is designed to be used. This technique became my primary tool for everything: learning English, remembering names, memorizing stories, preparing for interviews, training my listening, and even improving my daily productivity. I began visualizing my to-do list. I visualized concepts while studying. I visualized instructions, ideas, and plans. Suddenly, my brain stopped dropping information. It began holding it gently and firmly. But the transformation went deeper than memory improvement. Visualization made learning enjoyable. Instead of feeling like a painful task, remembering became a creative experience. I stopped feeling stressed. I stopped feeling slow. I stopped feeling defeated. I began feeling powerful, capable, and in control. The amazing part is that visualization does not require hours of practice. It only requires a simple shift in how you receive information. Whenever something enters your mind, simply ask, "What picture represents this?" and let your imagination do the rest. Some people worry they are not visual thinkers, but this is a myth. If you can think of your favorite food, your home, your childhood school, or the last movie you watched, you already use visualization effortlessly. All you need to do is apply it intentionally. This technique is used by memory champions, actors memorizing scripts, students preparing for exams, speakers learning long speeches, and polyglots storing vocabulary. They are not superhuman, they simply know how to use their brain. By the time I mastered visualization, I noticed something profound. My confidence in learning grew. The fear of forgetting disappeared. The anxiety of memory failures faded. For the first time in my life, I believed I could remember anything I wanted, and that belief changed my identity. Visualization is not a trick, it is a skill, and once you practice it consistently, it becomes second nature. In the next segment, you will learn the second pillar of remembering everything, the method that organizes your mind and sends information into long-term memory automatically. Segment 4. The second pillar of a powerful memory: build in connections instead of storing information. There is a moment in every learner's life when they finally understand why some information stays forever while other information disappears within minutes. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with talent. It has everything to do with connection. If visualization is the first pillar of remembering everything, then connection is the second, and without it, memory collapses. If you think back to the moments you remember most clearly, you'll notice something interesting. They are not isolated events, they are connected to emotion, to place, to people, to context, to meaning. The human brain is not a filing cabinet. It is not built to store isolated facts. It is built to store networks. Every time your brain remembers something, it remembers the web surrounding it. A memory without a connection is like a leaf without a stem. It dries, it falls, it disappears. This is the secret that memory masters, fast learners, and high-performing students understand deeply. They don't try to remember information, they build connections around it. The stronger the connections, the stronger the memory. The more associations you create, the longer the memory lasts. This technique doesn't just make remembering easier, it makes forgetting nearly impossible. Let me show you how powerful this is through a real story from my own journey. During my early attempts to improve my memory, I struggled to retain small details. Dates, definitions, vocabulary, numbers. I would repeat them again and again, hoping repetition would make them stay. But repetition alone is weak. It keeps the information floating in short-term memory without giving it stability. Every time I reviewed something, I felt it slipping away as soon as I looked at something new. Then one day, I discovered something that changed everything. I was listening to a podcast where the speaker mentioned a simple rule. Your brain remembers relationships, not facts. That one sentence hit me with incredible force. I paused the podcast, sat still, and let the idea sink in. If this was true, if my brain remembers relationships, then my approach to memory had been wrong all along. I didn't need to memorize more. I needed to connect more. To test this idea, I took a random fact from my notes. The hippocampus is responsible for memory formation. I created connections around it, visual, emotional, contextual. I imagined the hippocampus as a librarian holding a torch, guiding memories into long-term storage. I imagined it sitting inside a library, sorting information. I connected it to a moment in school when I learned about brain anatomy. I connected it to a friend who once joked about memory loss. Within seconds, the idea felt anchored. The next day, I tested myself, and the memory appeared instantly, not because I repeated it many times, but because I connected it deeply once. This is when I realized something important. Connection is the brain's natural language. When you speak to the brain in connections, it listens. When you speak to it in isolated facts, it forgets. Let me take you deeper into how this works. The brain contains billions of neurons, each forming connections with others. These connections form networks, and the networks form patterns. When new information enters the brain, it looks for a pattern it can attach to. If it finds one, the memory strengthens. If it doesn't, the memory fades. This explains why you can remember a story you heard years ago, but not the list you memorized yesterday. Stories contain chains of connections, characters, emotions, places, events. Lists contain nothing. They float alone in your mind like unanchored islands. And islands sink. Connection turns islands into continents. Think of learning a new English word like resilient. If you study the definition alone, your brain will drop it. But imagine connecting it to a person you know who never gives up, a moment in your life when you kept going, a scene from a movie where the hero stands up again, a quote you once heard about strength, a symbol like a plant pushing through concrete. Suddenly the word becomes alive. It becomes connected to multiple memories inside your brain. Now, when you try to remember the word, your brain doesn't search blindly. It pulls from the network and the memory appears instantly. This is how connection changes your mind. But connection is not just about emotional associations. It is also about belonging. When your brain can place information inside a category, inside a system, inside a framework, it becomes easier to retrieve. This is why organizing information improves memory. When information has a place, the brain knows where to find it. During the second month of my memory transformation, I created mental categories for everything: English vocabulary, study topics, life lessons, tasks, facts. I wasn't memorizing harder, I was organizing smarter. Every time I learned something new, I asked myself, where does this belong? And once I placed it inside a mental box, the memory stopped fading. It felt like building shelves inside my mind. Clear shelves, strong shelves, shelves that hold information tightly. But connection goes even deeper. It unlocks something called retrieval strength. Most people struggle not because they cannot store memories, but because they cannot retrieve them. The memories are there. They are just buried under layers of unorganized information. But the moment you create connections, retrieval becomes effortless. The memory comes when you need it, not when you force it. Let me give you a powerful example. Imagine learning 10 random facts in 1 hour. If you try to memorize them directly, you will forget most of them by tomorrow. But if you connect them, one fact leading to another, forming a chain, your brain will remember the entire sequence. This is how teachers remember long lessons. This is how storytellers remember long narratives. This is how language learners remember hundreds of words. This is how professionals memorize complex systems. Connection builds bridges. And when bridges exist, forgetting becomes rare. But the most beautiful part of this method is how natural it becomes. After a few weeks of practicing connection, you stop forcing it. Your brain starts doing it automatically. You hear something new and your mind immediately links it to something familiar. You see a new idea and your brain places it inside a category instantly. You learn a new word and your mind attaches it to emotion, image, or context without effort. This is when memory becomes effortless, automatic, natural, alive. Connection doesn't just improve memory, it changes identity. You begin seeing yourself as someone who understands information deeply, not someone who struggles to remember. You begin enjoying learning instead of fearing it. You begin trusting your mind instead of doubting it. This shift happened to me slowly, quietly. But when it happened, I felt it in every part of my life. I stopped avoiding new information. I stopped fearing details. I stopped feeling embarrassed about forgetting. I felt in control. I felt capable. I felt ready to learn anything. And that is the real purpose of the second pillar. Connection doesn't just teach you to remember, it teaches you to learn. It teaches you to see how knowledge fits together. It teaches you to enjoy the process of understanding. In the next segment, you will learn the third pillar of remembering everything. And this pillar is what moves information from temporary memory into permanent memory. Without it, nothing stays. Segment 5. The third pillar of memory. Repetition that changes the brain. There is a moment in every learner's journey when they discover the truth about repetition. Not the boring repetition we hated in school, not the forced memorization we used to fear, but the kind of repetition that rewires the brain, strengthens neural pathways, and turns fragile memories into permanent knowledge. The third pillar of remembering everything is not about repeating more. It is about repeating intelligently. Most people misunderstand repetition. They think repetition means writing something 50 times. They think repetition means rereading the same text again and again until their mind goes numb. They think repetition means forcing the brain to obey. But the brain doesn't respond to force. The brain responds to timing. The first time I realized this, I felt embarrassed. I had spent years repeating information incorrectly. I thought I had a weak memory because repetition didn't work for me, but the truth was simple. I was repeating the wrong way. I was trying to push information into my head through effort, not through rhythm. And memory does not grow through pressure, it grows through timing and spacing. This is where the concept of spaced repetition enters your life. If visualization creates the picture and connection creates the network, then spaced repetition builds the pathway. It creates long-term memory. It saves information from fading. It turns "I think I remember" into "I can never forget." Let me tell you the story of how I discovered it. After mastering the first two pillars of memory, visualization and connection, I noticed huge improvement. I could remember information more easily. I could recall ideas faster. But after a few days, some memories began to fade. Not completely, but enough to worry me. That's when I realized something important. Capturing a memory is not enough. You must anchor it. One night I was searching online for a solution, reading articles about memory like a person searching for air. That's when I came across a neuroscientist explaining the forgetting curve. According to research, the brain begins to forget information almost immediately after learning it. Not because the memory is weak, but because the brain is deciding whether the information is worth keeping. This curve drops sharply in the first 24 hours, but after that, the rate of forgetting slows down, especially if the memory is reinforced. What shocked me was how simple the solution was. If you review information at the right time, before the memory fades but after your brain begins to forget, the memory becomes stronger than ever. Reinforcement creates stability. Timing creates permanence. This is the heart of spaced repetition. It tells you exactly when to review information so the brain accepts it as important. Not too soon, not too late, just at the right moment. Once I applied it, everything changed. I organized my learning into intervals. After learning something new, I reviewed it after 1 hour, then after 1 day, then after 3 days, then after 1 week, then after 1 month. And without realizing it, the information became part of my long-term memory. This method didn't feel like memorization, it felt like maintenance, like watering a plant, like checking on something you care about until it becomes strong enough to live on its own. But spaced repetition is not just about dates and timing, it is about quality. When you review something, the brain asks, "Do we still need this?" If the answer is yes, the memory deepens. If the answer is no, the memory fades. But if you use visualization, connection, and spaced repetition together, the brain always says yes. Let me take you deeper into the neuroscience of why this works. Inside your brain are billions of neurons connected by tiny bridges called synapses. When you learn something new, a weak connection is formed. The first review strengthens it slightly. The second review strengthens it again. The third makes it stronger. Eventually, the synapse becomes so thick, so stable, so reinforced that the memory becomes nearly impossible to erase. Repetition thickens the pathway. Thicker pathways lead to faster recall. Faster recall leads to confidence. Confidence leads to mastery. This is why fluent English speakers remember vocabulary so easily. It's not because they are gifted. It's because they hear and use the same words repeatedly, naturally reinforcing the pathways. You can do this too, deliberately and strategically. Let me show you how repetition changed my English learning. When I learned new vocabulary, I didn't repeat it 10 times in a row. That made the brain tired. Instead, I practiced the new word once, then used it in a sentence after 1 hour, then used it in a story the next day, then heard it in a podcast 3 days later, then used it again in a voice recording 1 week later. Each time the memory grew stronger. Soon I wasn't trying to remember vocabulary. The vocabulary remembered itself. That's the power of spaced repetition. But repetition does more than strengthen memory. It changes identity. Every time you repeat something, you teach your brain who you are. When you review consistently, you become someone who remembers. When you speak repeatedly, you become someone who is fluent. When you review life lessons, they become part of your character. Repetition creates identity. This was the most emotional part of the journey for me. I realized that every habit, every skill, every belief I ever developed in my life was built through repetition, not talent, not luck, not intelligence, repetition. I understood that the things I admired in others, their confidence, their calmness, their discipline, were not gifts. They were repeated behaviors. And once I realized this, I began repeating the qualities I wanted to develop inside myself: calmness, focus, positivity, memory, fluency, confidence. Every day, through small actions, I reinforced them, and slowly, repetition rewired me. This is what I want you to understand deeply. Memory is not just a skill. Memory is a doorway to becoming someone new. When you remember more, your confidence rises. When your confidence rises, your opportunities expand. When your opportunities expand, your life transforms. But the third pillar, intelligent repetition, is what pushes your transformation from temporary improvement to permanent identity. Without this pillar, every memory becomes fragile. Every lesson becomes temporary. Every breakthrough fades. With this pillar, things stay. Knowledge stays, skills stay, languages stay, ideas stay, confidence stays. You begin to trust yourself. You stop doubting your mind. You stop fearing forgetfulness. You stop believing the story that you have a weak memory. You start believing something new, something powerful. I can train my brain. And when that belief settles inside you, remembering becomes natural. In the next segment, you will learn the fourth pillar of memory, the emotional force that turns ordinary moments into unforgettable experiences. Segment 6. The fourth pillar of memory, emotion. The fuel that makes information stick forever. There is a moment in every transformation journey when you finally realize that memory is not just a mental process. Memory is emotional. Your mind does not keep information because it is important. It keeps information because it feels important. And this one truth is the foundation of the fourth pillar of remembering everything: emotion. If visualization creates the picture, and connection builds the network, and repetition strengthens the pathway, then emotion is the force that seals the memory into your mind like ink pressed into paper. To understand this deeply, think about the moments you remember most clearly in your life. The day you were embarrassed in front of a crowd, the day you felt proud, the day you were scared, the day someone hurt you, the day someone loved you. These memories remain, not because you repeated them, not because you studied them, not because you wrote them down, but because emotion burned them into your brain. Emotion is the strongest glue memory has. When something carries emotion, the brain releases chemicals: adrenaline, dopamine, cortisol, that literally carve the experience into your neural pathways. The stronger the emotion, the deeper the memory. This is why a single emotional moment stays with you for years, while thousands of ordinary moments disappear. The first time I understood this, it shocked me. I was sitting alone, thinking about why I couldn't remember simple information but could remember painful or beautiful memories from years ago. Then the realization hit me. Memory is not logical, memory is emotional. And if I could learn to attach emotion to the information I wanted to remember, my brain would stop dropping it. This changed the way I studied, the way I learned English, the way I approach knowledge. I stopped trying to force information into my mind. Instead, I began asking a simple question. How can I make this emotional? A tiny shift in mindset, but a massive shift in results. Let me tell you the moment that proved this to me. I was studying English idioms one night. I had tried learning them before and failed every time. They felt boring, lifeless, empty words, but this time I tried something different. Each idiom became a story. Each story carried emotion. Each emotion created memory. Break the Ice became a scene of walking into a room filled with silent people, heart pounding, then saying something funny and watching everyone laugh. Hit the Nail on the Head became a moment where I solved a difficult problem and felt proud, confident, sharp. Piece of Cake became a childhood memory of eating the biggest slice of cake after finishing something difficult. Suddenly I could remember them all, not because I studied harder, but because I felt something. The next day, every idiom returned effortlessly, not one was forgotten. That was the moment I realized emotion wasn't just helpful, emotion was essential. Without emotion, memory dies. With emotion, memory lives forever. But emotion doesn't always have to be dramatic. Even a small feeling, amusement, curiosity, surprise, can strengthen memory. When you add just a touch of emotion to an idea, your brain listens. A boring lesson becomes meaningful. A dry concept becomes alive. A forgotten detail becomes unforgettable. This understanding opened a new world inside my mind. I started learning with feeling. When I learned new vocabulary, I imagined a moment in my life when I would use the word, a job interview, a conversation, a dream I hoped to achieve. Suddenly, the word mattered. And when something matters, it sticks. When I learned facts, I asked, how does this impact me? And the moment I found a meaningful connection, the fact remained. When I studied any topic, I imagined how my future self would feel using that knowledge, confident, prepared, capable. That emotional anticipation strengthened the memory before I even practiced it. Then something unexpected happened. Emotion didn't just improve my memory, it improved my motivation. It made learning exciting. It made studying enjoyable. It made knowledge feel personal, not distant. It made the process feel alive. Emotion turned information into experience. Let's examine what happens scientifically when emotion enters the memory process. Inside the brain sits a tiny almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. This structure detects emotional significance. When it senses something important or emotional, it activates and signals the hippocampus, the brain's memory center, to store the information more deeply. The amygdala says, "This matters, don't forget." This is why you remember the teacher who encouraged you, but not the one who gave you neutral instructions. This is why you remember someone who embarrassed you, but not someone who said something ordinary. This is why you remember the movie scene that made you cry, but forget the dialogue of the scenes that didn't touch you. Emotion decides what stays. Understanding this changed the way I approached everything in life. I stopped trying to study harder. I began trying to study emotionally. Even in the smallest moments, I searched for ways to make the information meaningful. And once I did, my memory began expanding far beyond what I imagined possible. Let me give you a powerful example. One day I needed to remember a list of 10 unrelated items. Normally, this would be difficult, but I used emotion to turn it into a story. I exaggerated the images, I added drama, humor, even absurdity, and suddenly the list stuck effortlessly. This is because the brain loves exaggerated emotion. It loves surprise. It loves creativity. It loves feeling. If you feed it plain information, it forgets. If you feed it emotional information, it protects it. Emotion is a signal of importance. Importance is a signal for memory. Once you understand how to use emotion intentionally, your memory transforms. And this brings us to the deeper truth behind this pillar. Emotion builds personal relevance. Relevance builds attention. Attention builds memory. Once I mastered this, I stopped feeling like a forgetful person. I stopped telling myself that my brain was weak. I realized that my brain was responding exactly the way it was designed to. And once I started feeding it the right signals, everything improved. Emotion doesn't just help memory, emotion changes identity. Because when you emotionally connect with the idea of becoming someone with a strong mind, your brain listens. Your brain adapts. Your brain rewires itself according to the identity you feel. And slowly, you begin becoming the person you always wanted to be. That is the power of the fourth pillar. Emotion fuels memory. Emotion shapes identity. Emotion accelerates learning. Emotion makes knowledge stay. In the next segment, segment 7, you will learn the final, most transformative pillar: how to bring all of these methods together into one powerful system that rewires your mind for life. Segment 7, the final pillar: the memory system that rebuilds your mind for life. There is a point in every transformation when you realize that you are no longer the same person who began the journey. You think differently. You remember differently. You respond differently. Your mind feels sharper, clearer, more alive. And as you reach the final pillar of memory, you understand something deep and powerful. Your brain is not just a tool you use. Your brain is a place you shape. The final pillar of remembering everything is not a technique. It is not a trick. It is not a single exercise. The final pillar is a system, a way of living, thinking, learning, and experiencing information that transforms your memory for life. This system is what brings together everything you learned in the previous segments: visualization, connection, repetition, and emotion, into one powerful structure that strengthens your mind every single day. To understand this, imagine your memory as a building. Visualization creates the walls, connection creates the rooms, repetition locks the doors, emotion lights up the entire structure. But without a foundation, a system, the building collapses. The final pillar gives you that foundation. It gives you stability. It gives you permanence. I discovered this pillar during a moment of frustration that eventually turned into clarity. I had learned dozens of techniques. I had improved massively, but I felt something was missing. Some days my memory worked like magic. Other days it felt slow. Some things stuck easily. Others faded too quickly. I needed consistency. I needed a structure that would make my memory strong whether I felt motivated or not. One evening, while reading about long-term learning, I found a single sentence that changed everything. Memory is not built by intensity. Memory is built by consistency. And suddenly, the missing piece became clear. I didn't need more power. I needed more rhythm. I didn't need more effort. I needed more structure. I didn't need more techniques. I needed a system that would apply the techniques automatically. So I created one. A simple system. A daily system. A system that made remembering natural. Even on tired days, busy days, difficult days. This system had 3 parts. Morning activation. Daytime integration. Nighttime reinforcement. Let me take you inside each part. The morning activation is when you prime your brain. You introduce it to the ideas, information, or vocabulary you want to remember. Not with pressure, not with long study sessions. Just a gentle activation, a spark. The brain is fresh in the morning. It absorbs faster. It listens more. A few minutes of focused attention here can shape the entire day. The daytime integration is when you weave the information into your life. You don't sit with a book. You live with the information. You visualize it while walking. You connect it while working. You repeat it mentally while traveling. You search for emotional meaning through experiences. This is when information shifts from theory to reality, from memory to understanding. The nighttime reinforcement is when you lock everything into long-term memory. This is when repetition works best. This is when the brain consolidates knowledge. Reviewing at night, just briefly, tells the brain, this matters. Keep this. And the brain listens. At night, memory becomes stable, permanent. When these 3 parts work together, the brain becomes unstoppable. But the system goes deeper than timing. It also requires something that most learners never consider: identity reinforcement. The identity of someone who remembers. The identity of someone who learns easily. The identity of someone whose mind is sharp and reliable. Memory grows when identity grows. If you tell yourself, I forget everything, your brain obeys. If you tell yourself, my memory is weak, your brain believes you. But when you begin saying, I remember easily, something shifts. Your brain rewires itself to match the statement. This is not magic. This is neuroplasticity. Your brain literally changes structure based on what you believe about yourself. During the final month of my memory transformation, I practiced this identity shift every day. When I learned something new, I didn't say, let me try to remember. I said, my brain remembers this. When something came back easily, I didn't say, that was lucky. I said, this is who I am becoming. Day by day, my memory improved, not just in ability, but in identity. And this is the deepest truth behind remembering everything. Your memory improves when you stop practicing techniques and start becoming a person who uses them without thinking. You visualize naturally. You connect information automatically. You repeat intelligently. You feel emotionally connected. You live inside your system. When that happens, remembering is no longer a task. It becomes your nature. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. Imagine learning 10 new English words in the morning. You visualize each word in a small scene. Later in the day, you connect the words to moments in your routine. You use the words in small sentences or imagine using them in future conversations. At night, you review them once, just once, before sleeping. By the next morning, they are yours, not temporarily, permanently. Imagine trying to remember a story or speech. You break it into scenes. You connect each scene to an emotion. You rehearse lightly throughout the day. You review at night. By the next week, the story feels like it belongs to you. Imagine trying to remember life lessons, advice from someone you trust, wisdom you heard, a truth you want to carry. You visualize it, you connect it, you revisit it, you feel it, and it becomes part of who you are. This is what a memory system does. It turns information into identity. It turns learning into transformation. It turns remembering into a lifestyle. But the true beauty of this system is something deeper. It changes the way you see yourself. Before this journey, I believed I had a weak memory. I believed I was slow. I believed I wasn't capable of retaining anything. But with this system, I realized something profound. My memory was never the problem. The method was the problem. And when the method changed, my mind changed. And I want you to feel that shift too. Your memory is not fixed. Your ability is not limited. Your potential is not closed. Your mind is a living, growing system. And you are its architect. You can remember more. You can learn faster. You can think clearly. You can change your mind, literally. The 5 pillars you learned in this journey, visualization, connection, intelligent repetition, emotion, and a daily system, are not temporary tricks. They are lifelong tools. Tools that will build you into someone who remembers effortlessly. And as you walk forward, carrying the strength of this new system inside you, remember this. Your memory is not your past. Your memory is your future. And the future you build with this system will be brighter, clearer, stronger, and more confident than anything you ever imagined. If this series helped you grow, if it changed how you see your mind, and if you want more powerful journeys like this, please like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe so we can continue building your future together. Your new memory begins now.